thanks first both for the invitation to the conference and for the warm introduction by Laurent. Best regards from Kristin and Kristina, who would like to be here but haven't found the time for various very good reasons. So before I talk about this, I'd like to remind us, because some of you were there, of another workshop we had over in the room next door, which was about metadata profiles for MEI about 1.5 years ago. And in that workshop, we tried to see if we could coordinate the different needs of different communities and what they needed from MEI. And the audience or the participants of that workshop were a little more mixed than my perception is of this group. So we had a whole lot of libraries, but we also had a whole lot of editorial projects and universities from different fields. So it was not so focused on authority files on the library side, although that was a major aspect of it. And we divided that group and decided to work on 3 different aspects. And after that meeting, there were several spin-off meetings at various conferences, and one outcome of that is a new module for better source descriptions in the current version of MEI. But that's not something we want to talk about today. We would like to focus on work catalogs because that seems to be the biggest overlap to today's topic. And in our discussions in one of those groups, we ended up with this slide on paper. It looks surprisingly familiar to what we discuss over here. Eventually, we came to the conclusion that all projects, all editorial projects, were able to map their internal understanding, their internal concept, which differed significantly. But we've been able to map all that into this concept, FRBA. And specifically, we're talking about FRBA, the entity relationship model. I will come back to that later. Now let's have a look into what FRBA offers. We have all those entities in there, and we have different, let's call them service providers, dealing with those entities. And places where I, as an DH scholar, would go to and look for further information or would deal with those. And so for the group 2 entities, we have things like YF, we have GND. We don't want to repeat all them. For the concept, object, event things, we have CIDOC, CRM, RDF, whatever. We have geonames for places, all kinds of things. RISM is already dealing with manifestation and item level. And now we're talking about RISM for the work level. Well, the important statement is, when we talk about this, we also need to consider the expression link. That's something we need to keep in mind when we talk about FRBA. Let's focus on that group 1 entities, manifestation and item. All that works pretty well for prints in RISM. It works not necessarily equally well for manuscripts from my perspective, or from a FRBA perspective, because it conflates the manifestation and item level. Luckily, FRBA hasn't stopped with those 4 entities. There's another version of FRBA called FRBA-RU or FRBA-OO for object-oriented, and they came up with a concept called manifestation singleton. So when there is a manuscript, you have only one instance, and it's closely tied, or it ties together manifestation and item level. You don't have to decide how to split that information up. So FRBA has a concept for that, and it should perhaps be reflected somehow if we want to model that properly. But all that is existing, we don't need to talk about it. We want to focus on work and expression level. And as we heard in various talks, the identification and separation here between work and expression might be very tricky. Actually, might be more time-consuming than a cataloger has time to invest. So that's really a problem. And at the same time, it enters the realm of research projects. This is where research projects come into play. It's their job to work on that level. So what are our needs as researchers? What do we expect from authority files, from RISM to offer? And let's go through that list. Done. We don't need anything else. We need reliable and good identifiers. Of course, in an ideal world, we would get full implementation of FRBA from RISM. So we would get all the entities on all levels, all properly separated, identified. That would be perfect. We would just go to the RISM shop, catch some data sets, and do some weird stuff with that and be happy. Apparently, there's a problem of providing that for RISM, for good reasons. I'm not complaining here. So if we don't get the full implementation of the FRBA concept, we need to make sure that if what RISM implements, if it ain't FRBA, please don't call it FRBA. You will create confusion, because if I expect a work entity to be conforming to the FRBA concept of work, then I make some assumptions that the data set may not satisfy. And so if it ain't FRBA, please don't call it FRBA. It will create problems afterwards. So let's look at the situation. We have various entities that RISM provides us. We have entity a manuscript, another manuscript, another manuscript. What researchers do is we provide additional statements about those entities. We want to say something about that source, about the content, about whatever. And we want to do that with all of them. But we also want to relate them. We make statements about the relations of those entities, something that the cataloger sitting in one library doesn't see at that point. He's not able to do that. So from my perspective, there's an almost natural division of labor in here. We're talking about this FRBA ER, those entity relationship model. And from my perspective, authority files, libraries, catalogers are good at providing the entities. Research projects are good at providing the relationships. I'm not trying to keep anyone from doing things on the other side, but there seems to be the natural habitats of catalogers and researchers from my perspective. If we recognize that status and want to play with it, we need to have some interfaces. We need to find a way to share our work. Because at this point, when researchers add information to those entities, it's really complicated to feed that back into RISM, to get it into the whole picture. So what we need is a good way for transparent and easy-to-use interfaces. And a particularly good example from my perspective is the so-called GND beacon. This thing works pretty well. Let me explain you the concept. There's a central hub in the middle. And then we have a research project, and let me just bring up one that I'm a little bit familiar with because it lives in the office next door. It's the Weber Gesamtausgabe, and they offer a list of works and have information about those works. So we have this file, this beacon TXT file, and this beacon TXT file gets registered at a central hub. So they say, we have this beacon file and you can look at us. So the hub knows about that thing. Now, let's have a look into that beacon file. This is how it looks like. It's a very simple, plain text format. And no worries, we don't want to go through all of that. The interesting thing is there's a identification what it is. And let me look it up. Target, this is the interesting line, because here we get a link which has a placeholder for an ID. And every line that does not start with the hash is an ID. So those are IDs within the GND of works that the Weber-Ausgabe makes statements about. And if you want to retrieve the information from the Weber-Ausgabe about that particular piece of work, you just have to use that link, insert any one of those IDs from the GND, and you will retrieve the content from it. So it's a very simple mechanism to say that I have statements to make about your IDs over there. That's the concept of the GND beacon. And it's quite a long file then, with quite a number of IDs. And of course, the Weber-Ausgabe is not the only contributor, the only one who's putting out such a beacon. There are multiple of those. And now when a user comes into the game, the user may request information from the hub about something specific. And the hub tells him about all the links, about all the different authorities or research projects or whatever that claim to have information about that piece. And now that the user has those links, he can query the projects which stand behind all those beacon.txt files. So those projects, they provide the information. And so the user can query all of them as he sees fit, and he decides which project offers the best information, which project has the piece of information that he's interested in. And it doesn't really matter if Project A makes a statement and Project C makes a contradicting statement. That's not a problem, because he has to decide what is of best use for him. So those projects are all isolated. They don't have to agree on what the best way is. They don't have to discuss if that is really the right property on that entity or not. They act within the field that they are experts, and they don't care about what the others are doing. So from my perspective, this is a very good infrastructure because we all can participate. It's possible to share data, it's possible to share information, but we don't have to have someone in the middle who claims to have the right solution for everything. And so from my perspective, RISM could play that role, but it might require RISM to be split up. One part would be just the hub that deals with the registration of beacon.txt files and the linking. The other one would be RISM as a data provider, where all the information that RISM already has goes into one of those boxes and is provided as information, because you do make statements about the relationship between sources and works already. But you make it with a certain concept of work that works for RISM, but it might not be the thing that a research project expects from a Furble implementation. So you could make your statements on that level, while the project down here offers Furble conforming relationships between those different entities. The only thing that's left then is you need to agree on a procedure how to add new identifiers to the central hub. That's the interesting thing. But I would be extremely generous, and we already heard about the solution that you, of course, keep old references pointing to new records then, because you came to new conclusions. So you don't throw away IDs, you just pile them up. But with an infrastructure like this, you can come up with very powerful setups like the Chorus search service, which offers to search for letters from a plethora of different projects dealing with letters. And there's no single entity in the game that controls how those letters are transcribed and what you do with those letters. All that is left to the individual communities. And still there's a central search hub for those letters. I'll leave it to you to go to that link and explore that thing. So I'd like to thank you.